Okay, now we're going to dive into great detail in this section around resumes and how to write a very strong and compelling and powerful resume to help you move along the process. And remember, the goal of a resume is to get you along to that next step, and that's an interview. I don't know of anybody who looked at a resume and said this person was so terrific and then hired them on the spot. Maybe it happens, but for most 99.9% of the time, it's to get you an interview. So we want to write in that way to get you through all those screeners, get you through all the hundreds of, or maybe thousands of resumes so you stand out and so you can get that interview for the next step. So let's look at some resume building block critical success factors, and then we'll get into great detail on how to build your actual resume to meet those critical success factors. And the first thing to look at is your resume needs to be easy to read for three audiences. Machines, these are the things that are going to screen looking for keywords. Human resources, an actual person who's really not the hiring manager or decision maker. They're just looking to screen for certain skills or certain things to be able to pass you on, or to pass your resume on to the next person, which is the hiring manager. And the hiring manager is is a decider who's going to be looking at your resume and deciding to interview you, or have a team member interview you. So those are the kind of the three key audiences in terms of the resumes. When you go through interviews, you might have multiple interviews with, other managers or maybe with coworkers or things, but when the resume part is there to get you to that interview step, machines, human resources, and hiring managers are your three audiences that you kind of need to balance for, and it's a little bit of a balance, a little bit of a trick to it to balance for each one. Also with your resume, the more you can customize it and customize it to each job you're applying for or that job description is the better. More is better in terms of customization. It takes time to do, but you're much more likely to stand out if you're using the keywords and the titles in your resume. So when machines are screening it, they're looking for your title is going to match up with what they're looking for, or the keywords are going to match up, and you're going to get not screened out. Same thing with human resource screeners or hiring managers. They're looking for not just good looking resumes, they're looking for how you can fill the job. So those keywords and titles and how it matches up exactly with the job makes you seem like the perfect candidate, or at least a great candidate they want to talk to. But you got to rebalance that return on investment, or ROI, of your time, right? It's hard to do that for every job. If you're applying to hundreds and hundreds of jobs, that's very difficult to do. But if you're really applying to 3 to 4 to 5 jobs, or even 10 or more, and you have the time, you can invest the time, it's really, really worth it. And if you use a template and some, I'm going to show you some free things that you can use that are very easy to adjust from a design standpoint coming up. And you can adjust that and just make quick little adjustments, maybe some little cut and paste, double check your work, save it, boom, there you go. Now you've got something more customized than just a standard, just generic resume you're sending out to everybody. That's much more effective than blasting out generic resumes to everyone. And then in terms of your work history and what you've accomplished, you want to really, I believe you really want to, emphasize measurable results. What measurable is much better. For example, raise sales. Okay, well, everybody hiring for a sales position or a sales manager position say, yeah, I raised sales. If you say I decreased sales by a bunch, then you're probably not going to get hired. So you say, yeah, I raised sales. But give those the numerics. I raised sales by 15% by implementing a new prospecting program. See how that's much more compelling? I got some results there if I'm a hiring manager looking at this. And you implemented a new prospecting program. Oh, I would be curious to see what that was. What worked for you? What didn't work for you? How might that apply to my company? So measurable stuff, whether it's on a project or skills or whatever it might be. And the reason these measurements are really talking about your accomplishments in somewhat bullet point detail, but still giving you a little bit more than just generic words, is we're looking for two things as far as managers. We're looking for proof. It's more than, yeah, you're a sales manager. I know the job description. Okay, you raise sales, so did everybody. But here's something where there's some detail, some proof, as in this example. And anything that you might be doing, you might be an IT person or accountant or human resources or work in a factory, whatever it might be. We're looking for that proof, and measurable results help us with proof. And I'm looking for a reason to interview you, like that prospecting program. That seems curious to me. So I'm looking for reasons to interview you. So think about when you're writing your accomplishments, don't be too humble and to really be specific, and when you can, as far as some of those measurable results. Also, of course, proofread. I mean, so many places you look at resume and how to do your resume. I mean, they spend a million hours on you got to proofread, you got to proofread. If you have one spelling mistake, you'll never get hired. I'm not sure about that. That's just kind of a basic thing. Yeah, you got to proofread. And you don't want to give anybody a reason to screen you out, but I'm telling you, I hired lots of people who hear spelled your, Y-O-U apostrophe R-E versus Y-O-U-R. And I'd say, I'm never going to hire that person. Okay. But if it's filled littered with like spelling mistakes or typos or the grammar's bad, and certainly if there's things that are inaccurate or don't make sense, yeah, then that's a reason to screen you out. So do your due diligence and make sure you proofread it well. You can have a friend or coworker, depending on the situation, take a look at and proofread it for you as well too. And also look at your resume as you're proofreading from the employer's viewpoint. Remember, they're looking to go on to the next step with you, either to screen you out and be done with you, or to have an interview. They're not going to hire you right now. They're going to want to set up an interview. So look at their viewpoint and say, is my resume written in a manner that's specific to the job I'm applying for enough that they'll give them a reason, in addition to all my accomplishments, to go on to the next step, which is to give me an interview. And then adjust as needed along the way. Adjusting for the specific jobs, and adjust your resume, especially if it doesn't seem to be working out as far as what people are looking at or whatever. You might go ahead and try different experiments and try adjusting. Also with a resume, you want to be concise. One page is really the norm. Some people with lots of experience can go to 2 pages. But more than 2 pages, if you look back at that section where it talked about how I looked at the resume and how the average first time look through people are spending 7.4 seconds. Well, if you've got 2 pages, 3, 4, 5 pages of stuff, they're not going to get to all that. In fact, they're going to groan when they pick it. I'm like, oh gosh, look at this, is like 3 pages. Oh my goodness. And you think like, this is my whole life. I spent all this time on this resume. And you're going to groan because it's 2 pages? Yeah, people do. So try to keep it to 1 page. Less is more. Remember, they're trying to screen you out in addition to trying to decide who to interview on, so don't give them a reason to screen you out. And then you can elaborate more in great detail in the interview. Like in that sales example, you're not laying out the whole program of that prospecting program and why it was successful. That's kind of the carrot. That's the little curiosity there. You share the result. Now, if you want to hear the story, we've got to have an interview. So that gives them a reason for you to elaborate in an interview, and that's really what you're going to do, is get that interview. So it's a real delicate balance between having enough and having too much, and it's not easy. So that's why a lot of people, you're going to go through several different ways of writing your resume, as far as different iterations, different ways you might like and look, and make those fine-tuning things as you go, as you get to that balance. And as you do, you're going to feel good about yourself because you're going to see that you are good. You're good at stuff. So, but be concise as far as with your resume. And lastly, with a resume, is resumes will follow you through your process, in particular through the interview process. Sure, you do a job application. When you're doing an interview, the hiring manager or a decision maker might look at the application, but they're going to look in great detail about the resume at this point, especially hopefully right before your interview, to get an understanding of you and prepare for the interview. And good managers, when they go through the interview process, will really review your resume and be prepared right before that interview. And they'll spend a little time. They might not spend a lot of time, but they'll spend at least some time so they're ready to ask the questions, to learn more about you as a candidate and see if you might be the person that they need. Remember, they need to hire somebody, so they're not there talking to you for fun. They've got something serious to do, which is fill a position. So good managers will really review your resume before it. So a well-written, easy to scan, easy to read, highlighting accomplishment resume really stands out, because then they'll ask you questions around your accomplishments, and that's to your benefit when they do that, versus using a lot of generic type boring interview questions. Now, there's also poor or very busy managers, so they're not necessarily poor. Some are just very busy, and some are poor. Let's face it, some are not great managers. And they might not have read the resume very much at all. They might have looked at it 2 weeks ago and said, yeah, let's interview this person. Now it's 2 weeks later, and they're interviewing you, and they're not prepared. They haven't looked at your resume. You can always tell because they're kind of reading through it as you're kind of starting the conversation after the first opening, hi, how are you, my name's whatever, pleasantries. And that's why a lot of times you'll be asked that first question, the very first question a lot of interviewers ask, and some good managers ask this question too, but certainly poor interviewers and busy people love to ask this question, which is, tell me about yourself, as an interview question. And when we go to the specific interview questions at the end of in the next sections coming up here, we'll answer that question because it's so common. But one of the reasons they ask that question is they're buying time a little bit to look over your resume, in addition to asking you to give this kind of overview of who you are. And when we talk about that specific question, we'll get into great detail on how to answer that question. And that question is really advantageous for you because you really get to tell your story in a succinct and concise way. And really, I love it when people ask me that question if I'm applying for a job, because that gives me a lot of control on what to say and all that. So that's where you can sometimes see where your resume is being used right in front of you, right with the interviewer. And that's perfectly good, because remember, you wrote the resume and you want them to see all those accomplishments, and you want to see you in your best light on a written form. And then when you're talking to them in the interview, in your, as you're explaining things more elaborately and in more detail and showing how you fit and how your knowledge, skills, and abilities match up with their company's job description and why they should hire you. And they should hire you and have you go through the interview process and give you an offer. And then you have all the power to decide whether you want to take that offer. But the whole idea is the resume is going to help you get an interview, and interviews are going to help you get to job offers. See how it kind of goes down the line here. But they all kind of start getting interrelated here between resumes and interviews.